And this video is all about making lemons into lemonade. Or in this case, tasty, tasty, high-velocity anti-tank lemonade. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this not one but two 120-ish scale M40A1 Recoilless. The models that you see here are built for my own personal collection and are not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. These two models here are a bit unique and a little bit of a different subject matter compared to what I generally bring on this table, but we'll be going over that info in this video. So stay tuned because this is going to be a fairly shorter video compared to my normal content, which some people are probably going to be happy about. But you know, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. These videos tend to be longer. But regardless, this video here is going to be a bit shorter, but it is going to have some interesting info nonetheless. So stay tuned. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around these two models. And these two models here are the M40A1 Recoilless. The M40 was a recoilless anti-tank weapon system that was designed by the US military in the 1950s timeframe. The unit itself was finally adopted in 1955 and was based upon lessons learned from the earlier M27 system, and the M40 was basically an improvement in every known metric. Although the M40 is designated as a 106mm system, it's technically a 105. The reason why it has that name disparity apparently has to do with the ammunition, and to avoid any sort of confusion between the rounds that were used on the M27 and the rounds used for the M40. Just like with the M27, the M40 is a recoilless system. This means that unlike a conventional artillery piece that fires the same caliber of round, where you need a very large, heavy lump of steel for the breech block, the chamber, recoil dampeners, carriage, all of that type of stuff, the recoilless system utilizes a perforated casing for the ammunition. And the way this works is that when the charge goes off, the propellant propels the projectile downrange, and instead of all of that force being contained inside of the breech block, it's actually vented out in a controlled manner by the rear venturi system. Because of this counteracts the recoil of the round going off, and this simplifies immensely the amount of equipment required in order to have a large, heavy ordnance, but fired from a very lightweight package. Because of this, unlike a traditional artillery piece where you need a tractor or some other type of heavy equipment to tow this thing, as well as a large number of men, the recoilless system can be operated by basically two people, where they could just move this thing around, set it up, and use it. The M40 was also widely utilized on a Jeep, and you have a Jeep with a 105mm ordnance on it. That is actually something that can give a punch well above its weight. To aim this weapon, it utilizes a spotting rifle, which is basically a semi-auto 50 caliber rifle that is magazine fed, and this allows you to use tracers in order to get the rounds on target. Because if you use the main ammunition for this, not only are you wasting rounds, but also you kind of give away your position, which is not exactly a good thing to do. The M40 was a very successful platform being used by the US military from the 1950s all the way up through the 1980s timeframe, where it was eventually completely replaced by the TOW anti-tank guided missile system. However, although the system is not in use with the US military, the government still has quite a number of them left on stock, and a number of them were actually used for a while for avalanche control, but also a few were even used by US Special Forces in places like Afghanistan, and yes, there is a video on YouTube where it shows a team utilizing one. Outside of the US military, the M40 is a extremely successful platform and is still in service today with a large number of NATO countries. So typically at this point in the video, I would say let's go ahead and take a step back to when these models were first started to get a good idea on what the base starter kit is, to which then I'd go ahead and give the model a thorough in-box review, as well as going over the kit history. However, for this, or I should say for these two over here, that's not going to be the case, because these aren't exactly a kit or I should say, they're not a kit that's, something that you can find off the shelf. These two models here were actually something that were custom ordered for commission about maybe a year or 2 years ago at this point. I've been sitting on them for a while, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to do the video on, that you're watching right now. So about 2 years ago, a person from overseas contacted me as they were interested in a M40 Recoilless for their 1/18 scale Jeep, or I should say it was a Mutt or something along those lines. Regardless, they saw the YouTube video in which I designed this particular unit here, or I should say several of these units, but those were in 1/6 scale. The 1/6 scale counterparts were actually the very first item that I designed for ECA. That was a fully 3D printed all-encompassing kit, and I've already made many videos about that topic, and it can be found on the ECA channel, which is funny because for a while this channel was known as the Recoilless channel, amongst other things. So, it's funny how that always happens. Sometimes I'm just the 1/6 scale tank guy, other times I'm the vintage tank reviewer, other times I'm just the other 1/35 scale model reviewer. Regardless, for a little while I was actually known as the Recoilless guy, and I've had a few emails coming about the subject. So on that topic, the individual contacted me, he saw the video and said, hey, he really liked the model in question. However, he was looking for something in a smaller scale. To which I said, sure, no problem. One of the great advantages about working in CAD and with 3D print is that you have infinite scalability with the components, and with very little modification, you can take something that's one scale and change it up to something else. And that has been mentioned several times on this channel with other parts from 1/16, that were scaled down from the 1/6 scale counterparts. Well, this here's basically the exact same story. The 1/6 scale files were readjusted to better suit them for the smaller printing, as obviously something in 1/6 scale can have certain details on it that will be beneficial for something in that scale, but the smaller you go, those details now become more frail, so you do have to make some slight modifications to them. All those modifications were made to the CAD files that we have found on these two examples. In addition to that, these units were going to be much more pre-assembled compared to the 1/6 scale counterpart. If anyone has seen the 1/6 scale video, you'll know that the M40 is basically a multitude of different components that all get assembled into the completed unit that we have here. Well, for the smaller scale counterparts, this part count was reduced to basically 3 pieces. So again, this was something that was done to better take advantage of this one, or I should say this type of manufacturing technology. Many of the design cues and features that are found on the 1/6 scale counterpart also trickle their way down to the small one, which we'll see as I continue with the video. Regardless, as for the components themselves, I was able to scale them down, and this is where things get interesting. So I told the individual, I could definitely scale it down. However, I am going to need an overall size on the component that you're going to need it for. So the individual who had the Jeep or the Mutt on hand went ahead, made some measurements himself. He relayed them to me, to which then I was able to use those measurements to scale down the two sets that you see presently. With the new measurements in hand, I was able to purchase not one but 2 of these units from my manufacturer, and the idea was that one of them was going to be sent to the customer and the other one was going to be kept for myself to just build it into a unit for my own personal collection, as well as do a nice little model showcase video and possibly a new product announcement video for the ECA channel as well as the ECA catalog. Everything was well and good. The components came in from the printer. They looked awesome. I had them in hand. By the way, for the manufacturing material, the units are entirely composed of HD 3D printed components. Some other components, namely the tube sections for the main 106, those are actually not 3D printed, and I'll be touching upon those momentarily. However, the remainder of the unit is indeed comprised of HD 3D print. Because of that, the detailing on them is very crisp, and it leads for some very excellent smooth results that you see here, and the parts basically mimic that of components made either in cast resin or components that are just made out of polystyrene plastic. So if you're watching this and you're saying to yourself, well, John, if things were going so hunky-dory, why is it that you've had these things for about 2 years now and you haven't released them or made any note of them, either on the Facebook page, the website, or even on the YouTube channel? And the answer is actually very simple, because immediately after I had my test component assembled, I was instantly hit into the nuts when I tried to test it, see if it fit on something in a similar scale. So here, let me move this guy off the table temporarily. Here I have a very dusty, I might add, 21st Century Toys 1/18 scale Willys Jeep. The reason why this is on the table and why it's extremely relevant, as I touched upon before, the individual wanted to mount the M40 to a vehicle much along the lines of this one here. I'm not sure if it was a Willys Jeep, it might have been the M151 Mutt, but regardless, he wanted to mount it on the back portion as it's supposed to be fitted on the real unit. So as I was working on the test sample, and just before the part was ready for painting, I'm like, okay, let me just go ahead and see how it fits on, a Willys Jeep. To which then I placed it into the back portion here, and I instantly realized we got a problem. If anyone knows a thing or two about the M40 being fitted onto a Jeep, you'll know that the M40's legs should really more or less come to the two corner sections here of the tail section, as well as the main tube section should come all the way and basically overhang onto the bumper section. And as you can see, it doesn't quite do that. It's very, very close, but it doesn't come to the point where it's where it needs to be. So apparently what happened was when that individual went ahead and gave me the measurements, he done goofed and he gave me the measurements for something that was not to scale, or I should say not to 1/18 scale that he was looking for. So because of that, this unit here was underscaled, and I didn't just have one underscale unit, I now had two of them because, like I touched upon before, I ordered two of them from the printer in order to get the one produced for myself and the other one to be sent off to him in kit form. Well, I told him about the complication, to which then I went ahead and made the adjustments to the components, scaling them up to something that is more appropriate to scale. And when I did, the costs also changed because of the larger nature of everything, and the individual was now priced out of his budget, so he wasn't able to continue with the project. So no problem, I went ahead and just kept the two units that we have right here, and these ones just wound up being built to the configuration that you see and being placed in the ECA collection. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, you're probably saying to yourself, yeah, but John, since you did scale up the new version, why didn't you ever release or announce that? And the answer is quite simple. I never got around to it. Honestly, it's just how busy I am. So I do have the CAD files. They're done. They are scaled up. It's one of those things that's been on my to-do list, but I keep kicking the can down the road. Either I just don't have the budget at a certain point to acquire these sections here, or for one other reason or another, I just haven't got around to it. So at some point I am going to go ahead and actually get a test sample produced, actually build it, compare it to the counterparts that I need it for, i.e. something of 1/18, but more realistically I'm probably going to scale up to 1/16, and then I'll release it and make a video at that time. But for the time being, we can at least take a look at what I believe are the 120th-ish scale. I believe I'm just gonna leave them as that. The 120-ish scale M40A1 Recoillesses that you see here. Also, as a quick plug, these units are not listed on the ECA Shapeways store or anything, but if anyone is interested, hit me up and I'll gladly list them for sale for anyone that feels so inclined to have something in 120th-ish scale in their collection. 120th is not exactly a popular scale. It is an off scale of an off scale. However, there are a few kits out there in 120. In fact, I have one in my collection. I haven't done the video on yet, obviously, but still, the 120 is this weird scale. Not 124, 125, that was something else, but just 120, 120. It's an off scale, but there are like one or two kits out there in the military vehicle market that are in that scale. So if anyone, for whatever reason, is interested, hit me up and I'll gladly go ahead and release the CAD files on the ECA Shapeways store in case anyone feels so inclined on, adding one of these builds to their collection. So I'm going to go ahead and move one of these units off the table because model-wise they are identical. There's just some slight painting differences between the two. And in addition to removing the other piece, I might as well also get the nice little glass turntable out so it reflects a little bit more light. So going back to the model over here, as I touched upon before, this is the 1/6 scale ECA kit, just miniaturized and optimized for this smaller scale in order to get it to print. And it features many of the same detail functions compared to the larger counterpart. However, some of the functions were omitted just to make the piece a little bit more practical. So let's start with what was left to be functional, and that brings us to the tripod. So The rear section of the M40's tripod is unique because it had this scissoring type design which allowed it to be adjustable in order for you to properly set the unit up into a certain location, mount it into a vehicle, or even it helps with the transportation and storage if it can be a slimmer package. All of which obviously are pretty important. So the 1/6 scale counterpart, these components here are functional in that regard, and on the smaller scale one here, the functionality was kept in the exact same configuration. As you can see, the pieces just pivot very, very easily and effortlessly. The front wheel on the 1/6 scale one is functional. However, on these two examples, they are not. And this was something that I actually was going to fix with later iterations. And this was something that was taken care of in the larger 1/16 CAD file that I also referenced before. But that information is best saved and left for that future video. Aside from the wheel, the carriage, as you can clearly see, is able to fully transverse, which is a nice little feature. And the unit can also have its elevation adjusted, although on this one here, it's a bit on the stiffer side because it was drooping on me and I added a small little drop of glue just to stiffen it up. On this one over here, you can see it's a little bit more maneuverable, and the unit can be adjusted with its elevation. And that's all there really is to functionality on this set here. The breech is permanently printed in the closed position, while on the larger counterpart, it was able to be modeled in both the open or closed state. This is something that I just didn't deem to be necessary for the smaller counterpart, but if anyone does want to have the larger scale one with this feature, let me know. Obviously, in this point of the development, you know, I could make the appropriate changes. But regardless, on this one here, it's all a solid printing. The other changes to mention is that on the 1/6 scale counterpart, the eye cup over here for the optic is actually a piece of cast rubber, and at least for a very realistic bit of detailing, as I mentioned in those videos. But on this one here, it is just a integral printing. It's all one piece, and the unit is just simply painted with a paintbrush to replicate rubber. The next thing I want to mention is the main tube section. On this one here, the tube is actually not 3D printed. Instead, it's an off-the-shelf tube from Plastruct. The idea was that by not printing out the tube section, this will cut down on the part's overall size, which makes it much more economical to have the part manufactured, and also it just makes it easier to assemble. You just simply cut the tube to shape and plug it into the correct location over here, and this comes at a fraction of the cost in having the entire unit be 3D printed. The 1/6 scale one was done in a similar manner, only this middle section here was also a tube compared to this one here where the entire midsection here is actually one complete 3D print. On the very end portion, we have here a small little ridge. This ridge here is actually a piece of shrink tubing that was thinly cut, shrunk down, and then fitted in place over here, giving you that nice little extra bit of detailing. This takes us rearward to the M8C spotting rifle, and the M8C was actually one of my favorite things to design on this model when I built it in 1/6 scale. And in 1/20th, or I should say in smaller scale, it did transition very, very nicely. The unit is a single printing that's built into the entire rear section here of the M40, as opposed to the larger one where everything were in subassembly components. The detailing, although it is smaller compared to the 1/6 scale one, it really did transition very well, as I mentioned before. Basically, all of the details that are on the big one are found on the little one as well. The unit does have to be painted separately, but this is definitely done with a little bit of a paintbrush method, and then you'll be able to achieve the looks that you see here. I'll be circling back on that when I go over the actual paintwork. Here you can also see the crank wheels. I believe the large crank wheel is a separate component that's found on the runner. It's been a while since I designed this set, so this is something that I believe was the case. However, the smaller crank wheel was integrally printed onto the main cradle over here. Also, you can see the nameplate. This was one of the cooler aspects, again, on the 1/6 scale one, because it actually had all that cool information and it was legible. On this one here, it's more or less amorphous, but again, it is much smaller in size. However, you can still see the detailing there of the nameplate, and it does have information present on this area. Moving rearward, you can see the Venturi breech system, a very iconic bit of detailing on this platform, along with the lock bar and the breech lever. We have the handles integrally built in, and also on this section over here, you get to see the firing cables for both the spotting rifle as well as the main 106. Not to mention the little lever that we have right there on the back. The wire is very thin, small silicone-coated electrical wire. This was something that I was going to include with these components when they were going to be offered as a kit form. And that's basically all there is to the units themselves. Detail-wise, this leads us to the paint. The paintwork, since I have two examples here, I might as well do them in two different configurations. This one here is your standard M40 with the whole section painted in black, while this one here is what I like to call the silverback version, where it is all black. However, the breech section is left in the white. This was based on an actual M40 that I had good reference images of on the internet, and was something that I incorporated on this one here. The entire M40 is black. However, the cradle as well as the tripod are painted in dark olive drab, which would be appropriate for this pattern. The optic here is also painted. Note the optic itself is separate from the optic mount, as this would just plug in place. And the optic itself is olive drab as well. Along with the base, you'll see the optic lens ring over there is painted in brass, and this is something that, again, I lifted from the real examples. And it does add quite a bit of extra color to the model. On that note, you can see the knob right here in the center of the crank wheel painted in red. This is your trigger, and this is how you actually fire either the spotting rifle or the main 106. For the weathering work, this was all done with the mix of the airbrush as well as with the dry brushing, much along the lines as I touched upon on many other videos found on this channel. The only thing though that these models weren't was that I didn't go ahead and varnish them like I've mentioned on my other smaller scale builds. For these two examples here, I just didn't think it was necessary, but you know, this is something that may or may not change as I do other builds that are similar to these two here. But these two here, you know, they're perfectly fine for what they are. And personally, I would think it would be video malpractice if I've been talking about this system for the entire video and not compare and contrast them with none other than the bigger brother 1/6 scale ECA M40 Recoilless that you can see right here. And just like the big one, the two little ones were equally as fun and quick to build and finish off with their paintwork. The big one though, yeah, that was a blast. I really had fun with that project. Also, quick shameless plug, the big 1/6 scale one is a catalog item listed on the ECA catalog and can be found in both kit form as well as also fully assembled like you see here. So in the end, although this project was a bust, it is still something that is a very interesting piece in my collection, regardless of it being an off-scale or not. It's a nice little shelf warmer and it looks really good with the other M40s that I do have in 1/6 scale. I will say this, the unit definitely was a very simple build. I was able to complete it in about 10 minutes, and that is the two of them. So it just shows you just how simple of a design I came up with in order to have something with this type of detailing on it, as well as this type of complexity, which would normally require more than one component. I was able to shrink all that down to basically 3 or 4. So build-wise, it was a breeze. Paint-wise, it was a fun little project. You know, something I just took care of on the side. And again, you know, it's just a nice, interesting piece in my collection. Normally at this point I would go over skill level and recommendations, but I'm just going to go ahead and skip all of that because these things are just a 2-off type set. There's only 2 of them in existence and you're looking at both of them here. In case anyone is interested in one, like I stated before, you know, definitely hit me up. But other than that, we could just go and skip to the very tail end of the video. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for these two 1/20th-ish scale M40A1 Recoillesses. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep update on new posted content, being small scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of these two particular models, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.